นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. Many of you know Ajahn Chah or Lumpur Chah as a teacher, as a meditation teacher or meditation master or enlightened master. And that reputation was established many, many years ago when he was in his prime, when he began his teaching at his monastery, Wat Nong Bapong, in Ubon, northeast Thailand. And people gradually got to know his reputation and had come to him from all over Thailand, some to train as monks and nuns, some to just listen to his teachings and then go away back to wherever they lived. And eventually people would come from all over the world, not just Thailand, to see him with the idea that he was a teacher. And I think the overwhelming majority of people were very happy and satisfied meeting him, hearing his teachings, however short or long. Occasionally, people didn't agree or like his style, perhaps, but that was very much a small minority. Most people grew to respect him and love him over the years and take him as a refuge because he was so clear-headed, peaceful, wise, compassionate, such a good teacher. And one of the drawbacks, you might say, one of the good drawbacks in a way, but one of the drawbacks was people would become attached to him as the teacher. And so he would sometimes have to show them that they had to learn through the practice of Dhamma for themselves. Simply clinging to the teacher, the words of the teacher, the views of the teacher was not enough for each person to get enlightened or progress in the Dhamma. They also had to develop their own understanding. So sometimes he would encourage people to reflect or investigate the Dhamma for themselves in their practice. So he wouldn't even always answer their questions. And generally he would, when people came to see him with questions about meditation or the mind or any aspect of Buddhism, the Vinaya, the discipline, the Dhamma, the truth, he would generally answer questions. But sometimes he wouldn't answer people directly or in a way that they thought he would answer. He'd bring up something new or a new light, shed new light on something they were thinking about or a problem. Some people, they had a question in their mind and he would answer it during his teaching before they'd even asked it. And some people, he wouldn't answer their question, particularly Sangha. If Sangha had a question, a monk or a nun came to him with questions, sometimes he'd just say, go away and meditate. Encourage them to develop their own understanding or stand on their own 2 feet rather than him just answering every single question. So that was quite common for monks as they went through their training, that they might be sent off to another monastery. So they were physically away from him to see whether they could learn and practice for themselves or with other students of Ajahn Chah, but without Ajahn Chah being there. And one monk came back complaining, having been to a branch monastery, quiet place where there was no teacher, and he was left to himself to learn to be mindful, contemplate, investigate the teachings, train in the rules and of discipline and the meditation techniques. He'd been left to himself, and he found there'd been quite a lot of suffering coming up in his mind because the conditions were challenging. The food wasn't to his liking. The climate was hot. He didn't have many people to speak his own language to. This was a foreign monk, and so on. There were challenges for him. So he suffered quite a lot and came back to see Ajahn Chah later. And Ajahn Chah asked him and said, "How's your practice been going?" And he said, "Oh, it's very difficult because there's no teacher." And Ajahn Chah gave a reply that he gave on a number of occasions. It's well known. He said, "Oh, but you have got a teacher wherever you go. You've got 6 teachers actually. You've got your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your skin or the sense of touch, and then your mind. The 6 sense doors are your teachers. Because wherever you go, your 6 senses go with you, and they're constantly bringing you sense contact. And that sense contact, good and bad, pleasant, unpleasant, is teaching you. Because that's where you react, and with those reactions we have sense contact, and we react to the feeling with that sense contact. And then we start to produce karma. And if we're not very mindful and aware, there's not much understanding, often it can be negative karma. For example, you see something pleasant, you like it, so you start feeling desire, wanting it or wanting to engage with it in some way or other. That sight. The sense of self-view might arise. My eyes seeing something. Sense of I, me, myself arises with the seeing, pleasant or unpleasant. Gives rise to attraction or aversion. But that's where you can learn. That's your teacher. So Luang Por Chah would say, this is how we know the world. It's not through traveling, and he'd laugh with this one because so many of his foreign students had traveled to get there to see him. And he was aware how people from other countries traveled all over the world, seeking out teachers, seeking the Dhamma, and just seeking different experiences. But he would say they've traveled all over the world, but they haven't seen themselves yet, and they haven't seen the truth. Whereas one practicing the Buddha's path, they just need these 6 teachers, which they have with them anyway. They don't actually have to travel to know their eyes, their ears, their tongue, nose, and touch, and the mind itself. But they do need mindfulness, clear comprehension, and to develop some understanding. So I say, you don't need to travel around the world to know the world. You know the world through your senses. That's where you've got to practice. Those are your teachers. And he'd often quote the Buddha and say the Buddha is the Loka Vidu. Say Loka Vidu, the knower of the worlds. And the Buddha was the knower of the worlds because he knew his own senses and the objects that come to him through the senses. The word he'd use in Thai is arom, which has many meanings. It's the meaning in the Dhamma. Arom means an object of mind, something that the mind knows, whether it's a sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, or just a thought. But in more familiar language in Thailand, arom means your mood. So good mood, bad mood, happy mood, sad mood, and so on. But the word can be used interchangeably in that way, and it's quite a useful word. It comes from a slightly longer word in Pali. The original word is aramana. Aramana, meaning objects of mind, can be pleasant or unpleasant. Generally, they fall into those two categories. They say it aramana and anitaramana, pleasant and unpleasant mind objects. And we're experiencing mind objects every moment of every day. Sense contact through our seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and then the mind itself. So when we meditate, often we're reducing the external sense contact. We find a quiet place like this, Bodhipala Monastery. We close our eyes, it's fairly quiet. We're not eating, smelling things, touching things. We draw our attention inwards. So then the most prominent sense contact becomes the thinking mind. Memories, thoughts coming up. And they become our teachers during meditation. Occasionally we get sounds and other impingement, maybe some aches and pains in the body and so on. But probably most of our time is spent up observing the mind, or getting to know the mind better and the thoughts it throws up. And that includes moods. So back to this word arom, you get to know your mood. And you'll see if you practice meditation regularly, even if it's only for short periods, you'll get to know different moods, won't you? You get to know whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood, you're elated, you're miserable, you're excited, you're bored. All the different kinds of moods you experience, you'll get to know them as you meditate. You get to know your arom. And then on a more refined level, from moment to moment as you meditate, you get to know sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, and how they affect the mind. And even if your eyes are closed and there's not much sense impingement, or you have memories of past sense contact that re-emerge and maybe trigger reactions again and again and again. So Luang Por Chah would encourage us to practice lots and lots of mindfulness, sati, to get to know this process, to get to know the world, but through our senses and the sense contact. Because that's where we learn, that's where we get wisdom. They're our teachers. We all know a teacher is somebody who gives you wisdom, gives you knowledge. And we're so used to seeking knowledge outside of ourselves from a living teacher, or their words in books or online, and that we forget we actually have these 6 teachers with us all the time. One after another, one moment after another, these teachers are giving us teachings. It's just that we miss them because we're often not very mindful or aware. And often it's also just our habit is that we look outside for the knowledge that we think will bring us enlightenment. And actually that is part of the practice, listening to the Dhamma. but not all the time. And we also have to turn our attention inwards and then learn from our own experience. And then Rinpoche would say, well, then another thing that comes up is once people are trying to learn from their own experience, what they try to do first is usually work it all out through thinking, comparing, working out, this is like this, that's like that, analyzing, where did this come from, why do I feel like this, what's happening, on and on it goes. So even as they meditate, trying to bring up mindfulness, they're often caught into analyzing, thinking about their experience, which again prevents the mind maybe from being very mindful in the present moment, and can even lead to confusion or even feed different moods, takes them away from the truth. So sometimes he would say, when you're learning from these 6 teachers, your aim is simply to watch, just observe, rather than try and think it through all the time and work it all out through thinking, or what we call contemplation. So real insight arises when the mind is silently observing the way things are. And there may be a sight coming to your eyes, conscious sight consciousness, eye consciousness arises. And then you notice your mind moves, maybe drawn to something pleasant. So you see a beautiful flower, say, and you're drawn to that. And that may happen over and over again to the point where it becomes, we say, your attachment, and you become one who likes beautiful flowers, for example. You may have your preferences, certain kinds of flowers, certain colors, and then there's the sense of, oh, this flower has withered, and we say died. When it shrivels up after it's been picked, it will shrivel and then you throw it away. So your eye consciousness gives you this view. You see a fresh flower, fading flower, then maybe a dead or a wilted flower, and you get a different reaction. You may feel sad when you see a flower that's wilted and dried up because it's no longer beautiful. And you multiply that by 6 senses, and then all the experiences, pleasant, unpleasant. It becomes quite a lot of information that's constantly coming to your mind. So you need to be vigilant, mindful. And that's why we practice. When we're not particularly mindful, we never learn meditation, never learned the Dhamma, then of course we tend to get pulled around by all these experiences. We go up with the highs and we go down with the lows. That's why we experience moods, or aram, good mood, bad mood. You get the things you like, you see them, smell them, taste, touch, or remember them, think about them, and you feel pleasure. And then the pleasure fades because its nature is impermanent. So then you have to seek more, and the seeking of more can be involved. It can bring up disappointment, you get tired, you get disappointed, frustrated. And of course, if you don't get what you want, maybe you get something that you don't want or don't like. And so you experience displeasure. As you practice mindfulness, you become aware of that. You're observing these processes at work, simply from a place of silently witnessing or getting to know your own mind better. course, sometimes we have to listen to the Dhamma and think about it, but we're aiming to develop this skill of just being able to know experience as it is, know the truth, know the world as it is. And this is where we know the world, through being mindful from moment to moment. Mindfulness itself brings the quality of equanimity or detachment. So when we're truly mindful, we're just knowing the experience without getting lost in pleasure or pain, or the liking and disliking. That's why it's such a useful tool that will support this practice of observing, learning from these teachers, these 6 teachers. When we lose our mindfulness, we get caught back into grasping at pleasure and pushing away unpleasant, painful experiences, what we call craving, tanha. When we are mindful, the mind has this quality of neutrality, knowing but without suffering. So mindfulness also is free from suffering. So it's a very useful quality to develop over and over again until it's more sustained, stronger. And that allows us to observe and learn from these teachers very well. You'll notice when you're not particularly mindful, everything that pops into your mind, every thought, every feeling, stimulates a reaction of some sort. We may not be mindful, so we don't really see that, but when you reflect back, perhaps you'll notice it. Liking, disliking, wanting, not wanting, even more neutral feelings when we're not mindful tend to promote dullness. So dullness is a big problem for meditators. We have sleepiness, dullness. Meditators often go into a state where they feel reasonably peaceful, but they're dull. They're not actually knowing very much at all, because there's not much mindfulness and the feelings are fairly neutral. But our aim is to maintain mindfulness so we can observe and not let all this sense impingement condition more delight and aversion for the world, not create more of the world in the mind. So mindfulness is the center of this path out from attachment to the world, or we say out from being lost in the world to a place where we're released from the world because of the presence of mindfulness and then insight or true vision of the way things are. And when we're mindful, it's possible to see sights are impermanent. They arise, they pass away, however beautiful. So you're like going back to the flower. In the time of the Buddha, there was somebody who was really struggling with the meditation. And they had their love of beautiful things, but they couldn't practice vipassana. They couldn't develop insight into impermanence or the conditioned selfless nature of experience. It was too difficult. They couldn't settle down because the mind was too agitated. So the Buddha said, okay, just start by observing a flower that you like, say a lotus flower, beautiful lotus flower. And you can make it the most beautiful color that you like, maybe white or whatever color you like. Visualize this flower, look at this flower. You actually get a flower, hold it, look at it, remember it in your mind. And they could do that very well because they liked the beauty of that flower. But then, of course, a real lotus flower doesn't last. It starts to wilt, shrivel. As it shrivels, it dries out, it becomes darker, you get patches of black. The petals change color, they become brown, dark, and then they drop off. eventually the whole thing kind of disintegrates if you keep watching long enough. So this meditator did that, and they became enlightened and fully penetrating the impermanent nature of phenomena, just watching a lotus change from beautiful, fresh, colourful to faded, withered, dead, and then dissolved, disappearing. So our 6 teachers we can use like that. Anything you notice your mind being attracted to, smell, taste, touch, memories, then observing with mindfulness over and over again, observe how they change, they fade. They're not permanent. And what's not permanent, you can't keep. Certainly can't keep forever. You can keep for a little while, but then it's gone. When you can really see or know impermanence with your mind, then you start to tire of grasping at something because you know it won't last. So like with the lotus flower, you can have it for a while, you can put it on a shrine, keep it in a vase in your house, but you know at some point it will fade and wither away. Once you know, then you don't suffer with it. If you don't have a lotus or when it withers, you just accept that because you know. And you get tired of grasping or expecting it to be any other way because you know it's not that way. That's probably why people invented plastic lotuses, so they could keep them longer. And that's what modern technology and culture does, isn't it? It tries to make things last, so we produce imitation lotuses or whatever. But in terms of meditation and understanding the world through our senses, you just get to know the way it is. Oh, a flower, it's beautiful and then it fades. And you learn that once, and you're learning that with everything. Sounds, beautiful sounds, beautiful taste, food, smells, fragrances, smells. Everything is displaying the same characteristics, impermanent. We say stressful, dukkha, because they can't last. They're stressful because they're constantly changing, breaking up. And they're subject to conditioned process. They're not self. They're not something you can fix, own. They're not a person or a being that will last forever and ever. But seeing this is educating your mind, teaching your mind about reality, about the world. And this is where we really get to know the world. Once people see the world, then they don't get so caught up in it or lost in it. And they start to experience what we call release from the world. You know, the Buddha used the word release. Release from being stuck or fixed or attached to the world through your senses. The mind goes to being released from the world by seeing truly the way things are. So if we do that more and more, we get the happiness of release, which is a bit different from just the pleasures of the world, which are so intoxicating and gratifying. Now we get the happiness of release, meaning I'm no longer bound up in the world or attached to the world because I know the way the world is. And even the very sense of I who knows the world disappears. One of the questions those students would like to ask Ajahn Kalyano, who is it who knows the world then? Who is it who's mindful? Who is it who sees impermanence? But as you keep practicing, well, even that I who sees, and the one who sees, disappears. And the very question disappears. That way of thinking disappears. through the practice, but not through denial or suppression. Simply it dissolves through clarity and insight. And that process takes time for most people. Most people are not going to be instantly enlightened and see through this sense of self and the conditioning process, let go of their moods, let go of these attachments to pleasure and pain, pleasantness, unpleasantness. They'll do it sometimes and then they'll forget and get lost again. So sometimes we do turn to the teachers for reminders, and they set the example and they give us teachings, but really to be released from the world, we have to do it for ourselves. And that takes time, effort. And that's one of our challenges, in giving ourselves time to the practice, committing to the practice. And someone was talking about this earlier, like how do you look at the practice of Dhamma or the practice of the Buddha's teachings? Do you see it as your life? Your life is the practice. So your whole life becomes part of the practice. Or do you see the practice as just part of your life? And then there's these other parts which have nothing to do with the practice. If you still see the practice as just part of your life, then it's quite hard to understand this point about taking your senses as the teachers, because you'll only do it occasionally. And you maybe won't really commit to developing mindfulness and really understand your sense contact. You'll do it sometimes, but then other times you don't bother, don't do it. And so feed all kinds of other habits of craving and attachment, they'll come up. On the one hand, we practice, on the other hand, we're not. Because practice is still only a part of your life, maybe. What we're aiming to do is turn that around so that everything becomes part of the practice. Because at every moment we have sense contact. You wake up in the morning, you're already seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, remembering things. The thought cycles kick in as soon as you're conscious in the morning, through till the evening when you go to sleep. Your six senses are there, active. That's why we make everything part of the practice. Not easy. It's not easy, so we tend to get discouraged. Or sometimes we want the teacher to do it for us, and we go to the teacher and ask the questions and want all the quick and simple answers so that we can remember them and we feel like we know the Dhamma. We don't like that. So we can answer the questions ourselves, but that's still just answering through memory or intellect. We actually have to do the groundwork, the patient groundwork of the practice as well. It's like in the time of the Buddha, the Buddha told a story. He said when in a past life he was somebody who made wheels for chariots. In those days, chariots were the main war weapon that kings wanted. So they wanted a good chariot with good wheels. And the Buddha said that one time the king, in the life before he was a Buddha, the king came to him and said, in 6 months I'm going to war. I need my chariot made really strong, tough, well made, because I'm going to war and I need good wheels. So he started making a pair of wheels for the king's chariot. And he worked on one wheel, making really well, strong, perfect, turning the wood, bolting everything together, did it all really well. but it took ages. And just 1 week before the war, before the 6 months was up, the king sends for him and says, where are my wheels? I'm getting ready to go to war. And he said, well, I've got one wheel finished. And the king is a bit concerned. He said, what? One wheel has taken you 5 months, 3 weeks. I've only got a week left. What about my other wheel? And the Bodhisattva said, well, I'll do it. I'll go and make the other wheel. So he went off and he made the other wheel and then brought the chariot back just before the war. So he's got 2 wheels, and the king said, well, hold on, you spent almost 6 months on one wheel and just 1 week on the other wheel. How's this going to work? And the Bodhisattva said, well, they'll both do, but they're different. King says, how are they different? Well, the one wheel that I made very well took many months of work. Once you set it in motion, if you just let it roll on its own, it'll roll and roll and roll until it runs out of energy, and then it'll just stop, but it'll still be standing. The other wheel that only took 7 days, that still has a lot of imperfections in it. It's got bumps and knots and holes, and things aren't joined together quite so well. So it will roll. When you set it rolling, it will roll and roll and roll. But when it runs out of energy, it will topple over and then just spin around until it stops. It will be flat on the ground because it's not made so well. A lot more imperfection. And the lesson from the story is that, if you really want to iron out the imperfections in your mind through your practice, well, it takes time and you have to keep working at it. And the Buddha said to the monks, monks, you can't leave any imperfections, any blemishes in your mindfulness or in your understanding, any blind spots. Or the word Ajahn Kalyano used is fumbling, that you can't still be fumbling or groping around in the Dhamma, like someone in the dark trying to find things in the dark. Your mind has to be clear. Your mindfulness has to be solid. Your insight into impermanence and the selfless nature of your experience has to be solid, firm. And then you won't topple over or collapse like the wheel that was made in 1 week. So practice takes time. We have to practice over time, keep doing it. But if you're willing to commit and keep doing it, then you can get good results. Maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and perhaps there'll be some questions afterwards.
Han tamayang wada kata sadu karang tatamase satu 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 anamotami